I knew the moment he looked at my son that my past had finally caught up with me, and there was no running this time. 10 years ago, I disappeared without a goodbye, without a fight, without the courage to tell him the truth. I told myself I was saving my soul. I told myself I was protecting a life that hadn't even taken its first breath yet. I repeated those thoughts like prayers, like excuses, like lies I needed to survive. I thought if I left quietly enough, the pain would fade faster. I thought distance could erase love. I was wrong about one thing back then. You don't outrun love. You just carry it quietly, like a bruise no one sees, like a wound that stops bleeding but never really heals. Even now, a decade later, I still feel it in small moments. When the city goes quiet at night. When I hear my name spoken softly by someone who doesn't know how much weight it carries. When I catch my reflection in glass and see the girl I used to be staring back, eyes full of hope she didn't know would cost her everything. I was 24 when I loved him the first time. Too young. Too soft. Too hopeful. I didn't know that love could feel like standing at the edge of something beautiful and dangerous at the same time. I didn't know that safety and affection could exist in the same hands that held so much power. Back then, I believed love was enough to change people. I believed that if someone loved you gently, the rest of their world would soften too. I met him on an ordinary day. That's the cruel part. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cinematic. Just a quiet introduction at a work-related event I almost didn't attend. I remember standing near the back of the room, nursing a cheap glass of wine, feeling invisible and slightly out of place. He noticed me anyway. He always noticed things other people overlooked. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his voice low, calm, almost amused. I smiled politely. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way," he replied. That was it. That was the beginning. No sparks. No fireworks. Just two people sharing a small truth in a crowded room. I didn't know then that he was watching me more closely than I realized. That he was already cataloging my reactions, my silences, the way I listened more than I spoke. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate conversations. He stood slightly apart, hands relaxed, eyes observant. People gravitated toward him anyway. They leaned in when he spoke. They laughed a little too quickly at his jokes. They measured their words carefully around him, even if they didn't know why. Later, I learned why. He wasn't a criminal. That was what made it harder to explain, harder to justify my fear. He didn't break laws. He bent realities. He fixed scandals before they reached the headlines. He made problems vanish without noise. Careers imploded quietly. Public images were reshaped overnight. Truths were buried under more convenient narratives. He decided who survived reputations and who didn't. People smiled around him while guarding their secrets like loaded weapons, because they knew he could dismantle their lives with a phone call and a well-placed whisper. The first time I realized what he really did, my stomach turned. "You're quiet," he said one evening as we walked through the city, lights reflecting off wet pavement. It had just rained, the air warm and heavy, the kind of night that makes everything feel intimate. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "Dangerous habit," he said gently, glancing at me. I hesitated. "What happens to people who cross you?" He stopped walking. Turned to face me fully. His expression didn't harden. That almost scared me more. "I don't think in terms of crossing," he said. "I think in terms of consequences." The way he said it was calm. Reasonable. Like he was talking about the weather. I remember nodding, pretending I understood, pretending it didn't matter. But something shifted in me that night. A small crack I ignored because loving him felt easier than facing what he represented. Because when he was with me, he was different. With me, he was gentle. He listened. He remembered things I mentioned once in passing. He noticed when my hands trembled and covered them with his own without drawing attention. He never raised his voice. Never rushed me. Never made me feel small. Sometimes he would brush his fingers over my wrist when he passed me something, like he needed to reassure himself I was real. Sometimes he would lean in close, his breath warm against my ear, and say my name like it mattered, like it was something precious he didn't want to mishandle. "Stay tonight," he would murmur, not demanding, not pleading. Just asking. And I would stay. Every time. Even when a voice in my head whispered that I shouldn't. Even when I felt like I was stepping deeper into a world I didn't understand. There were moments, small, telling moments, that made my chest tighten with unease. A friend of his who suddenly stopped calling. A colleague whose name disappeared from conversations overnight. A woman at a dinner party who went pale when she realized who he was sitting next to. Once, I asked him about it. I shouldn't have, but curiosity and fear have a way of teaming up. "Why does everyone look at you like that?" I asked softly, tracing patterns on his palm as we lay together in the dark. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because they know I don't bluff." I laughed nervously. "About what?" "About protecting what's mine." My heart stumbled at the word mine. It sounded romantic. It sounded dangerous. It sounded like a warning disguised as a promise. I tried to tell myself that every powerful person had enemies. That influence always came with fear. That I was overthinking. I hated how easily I ignored my instincts when they contradicted my feelings. Why was I like this? Why did love make me reckless? The night everything truly began to unravel was quiet. Too quiet. I was alone in his apartment, standing by the window, city lights glittering like scattered stars below. My hand was resting over my stomach, my breath shallow. The test was folded in my pocket, my heart racing with a mix of terror and wonder. I hadn't told him yet. I wanted to choose the right moment. I wanted to see his face when I said it. I wanted to believe he would smile. My phone vibrated. A message. From a woman I admired. Someone who worked closely with him. Someone who had once looked me in the eye and said, "Be careful. Men like him don't love halfway." The message was short. Shaking. "They know." I tried to speak up. "I think I ruined everything." I typed back immediately. No response. By morning, her name was everywhere and nowhere. Fired. Discredited. Accused. Isolated. Friends distanced themselves. Doors closed. Her social presence wiped clean like she had never existed. No explanation. No scandal. Just silence and damage. I stood in his kitchen, watching him pour coffee like it was any other day, my skin cold despite the warmth of the room. "Did you hear about her?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Yes," he said without looking up. That was fast. He met my eyes then. Just for a second. It needed to be. Something inside me broke open. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a bone cracking under pressure. I realized then that love wasn't enough to keep me safe. That tenderness didn't cancel out power. That gentleness didn't mean harmless. And standing there, with a secret life growing inside me, I understood something terrifying and clear: if he could erase someone who challenged him, he could erase anyone. Including me. Including a child. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside him, listening to his breathing, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of his body, knowing it might be the last time. Every memory felt sharper. Every touch heavier. In the early hours, while the city slept, I packed a bag. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone twice. I stared at him once more, wanting to wake him, wanting to scream the truth, wanting to beg him to choose differently. But love had already shown me its limits. I left without a goodbye. Without a fight. Without the courage to tell him the truth. And for 10 years, I lived with that choice echoing through every part of my life, wondering if saving myself meant destroying us both, and whether love, once abandoned, ever truly lets you go. Until the night everything broke. I remember the exact second it started. The sound of the city outside his apartment was low and distant, like the world was holding its breath. Cars moved far below, their headlights sliding across the walls in slow patterns. His place always felt suspended above everything else, quiet, controlled, untouched by consequences. I used to love that feeling. That night, it felt like a trap. I was standing near the window, barefoot on the cold floor, holding the pregnancy test between my fingers like it might burn me if I squeezed too hard. 2 lines. Clear. Unapologetic. Real. My heart wouldn't slow down. My thoughts wouldn't line up properly. I kept pressing my palm to my stomach, like I could protect something already fragile just by touching it. I hadn't told him yet. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I had rehearsed the moment all day. I imagined his reaction 100 different ways. His surprise. His silence. His careful questions. In my softer fantasies, his smile. Him pulling me into his chest and whispering, "We'll figure it out." I held onto that version of him like a lifeline. My phone vibrated in my hand. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. The name on the screen made my chest tighten instantly. She was someone I admired deeply. Sharp, principled, brave in ways I had never dared to be. She worked close to him. Closer than most. She had warned me once, quietly, when no one else was around. "Be careful," she had said, her eyes searching my face. "Men like him don't destroy you loudly. They make you disappear." I told myself she was projecting. I told myself she didn't know him the way I did. The message was short. They know. I tried to stop it. I think I ruined everything. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "What do you mean? Are you okay? Please call me." No response. Minutes passed. Then longer. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. My heartbeat started to pound in my ears. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like it was pressing down on my chest. When he came out of the shower, towel slung low on his hips, steam clinging to his skin, I forced a smile. "You okay?" he asked casually, reaching for a glass of water. "Yeah," I lied too quickly. "Just tired." He studied me for a second longer than usual. Not suspicious. Assessing. "Come sit," he said, patting the couch beside him. I sat. He pulled me close, his arm warm and familiar around my shoulders. I rested my head against him, listening to his heartbeat, trying to calm my own. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. That fear was just hormones. That love was stronger than paranoia. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a news alert. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. His body stiffened instantly beside me, like he already knew. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Nothing," he said smoothly, reaching for the remote. "Just noise." I pulled away slightly, searching his face. "Did something happen?" He met my eyes. His expression was calm. Too calm. "Sometimes," he said, "people forget the rules." A chill ran through me. Rules? I repeated. He tilted his head. About loyalty. I didn't say her name. I didn't have to. The silence between us filled with everything he wasn't saying. I felt suddenly small. Exposed. Like I had wandered into a room I was never meant to enter. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat awake beside him, the test clutched in my hand under the covers. My phone lit up again and again with fragments of information. Whispers. Screenshots. Headlines that didn't mention him but revolved around his orbit. By morning, she was erased. Not dead. Worse. Fired. Contracts terminated. Accusations leaked anonymously. Old mistakes dragged into the light and magnified. Friends went silent. Invitations vanished. Her name became something people avoided saying out loud. Like it was contagious. I stood alone in his kitchen at dawn, watching sunlight creep across the marble counter, my coffee untouched and cold. My hand rested over my stomach instinctively, protectively. The city looked the same as always. Busy. Indifferent. Alive. Inside me, something had frozen. When he came in, fully dressed now, tie perfect, expression unreadable, I couldn't stop myself. Did you hear about her? I asked. He paused for half a second. Just half. Yes, he said. That was fast. He set his mug down carefully. Too carefully. She made choices, he replied. Choices have consequences. I swallowed. She was trying to do the right thing. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. His gaze wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was something colder. More distant. The right thing, he said quietly, depends on who you ask. My throat tightened. And if someone you loved made the wrong choice? His jaw flexed. I don't let people I love put themselves in danger. The words were meant to reassure me. They terrified me. I realized then how thin the line was between protection and control. Between love and possession. Between safety and silence. I imagined telling him about the baby. I imagined his reaction not as a fantasy anymore, but as a calculation. How would a child fit into his world? What risks would it introduce? What compromises would he demand? I hated myself for thinking that way. I hated that the doubt felt justified. That night, he kissed my forehead before bed and said, "Everything's handled." I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, every muscle tense. My heart kept asking questions my mind didn't want to answer. What if loving him meant never being able to leave? What if my child grew up learning that power mattered more than truth? What if safety came at the cost of silence? Around 3 a.m, I made my decision. Not bravely. Not cleanly. Out of fear and instinct and a desperate need to protect something innocent. When he got into the shower, the sound of running water filling the apartment, I moved fast. Too fast to think. I grabbed a bag and shoved clothes inside without folding them. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice. I paused once, staring at the test on the bathroom counter, then stuffed it into my pocket. I walked through the apartment like a ghost. Every object felt heavier than it should have. Memories clung to everything, the couch where we laughed, the kitchen where he cooked for me at midnight, the bed where I had once believed I was safe. I stood by the door for a long moment, my hand on the handle, listening to the water running, my chest aching. I could still tell him. I could still turn back. I could still believe in the version of him I loved. Courage would have made me stay. Fear made me leave. I didn't leave a note. I didn't explain. I didn't say goodbye. I disappeared because staying would have required me to gamble with a life that wasn't just mine anymore, and I wasn't willing to lose that bet. As the elevator descended, my legs nearly gave out. By the time I stepped onto the street, the city was waking up, unaware that my world had just ended. I pressed my hand to my stomach again, tears blurring my vision, whispering a promise into the noise of morning. I would protect this child, even if it meant breaking my own heart forever. Raising my son alone taught me a different kind of strength. Not the kind people applaud. Not the kind that looks impressive from the outside. The quiet kind. The kind that wakes up before dawn and goes to sleep long after the world has gone silent. The kind that stretches money until it feels transparent, that learns which bills can wait and which fears cannot. The kind that swallows loneliness whole because there is no room for it when a small human depends on you for everything. I learned how to smile through exhaustion. Real smiles for him. Practiced ones for everyone else. I learned how to carry groceries in one hand and a sleeping child in the other. I learned how to cry silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear it through the door. I learned how to say we're fine until it almost became true. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed, watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling softly, his tiny fingers curled just like his father's used to be. That was the part that hurt the most. The resemblance. The way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks. The way his eyes, those unmistakable eyes, looked up at me with absolute trust. Sometimes I would whisper into the dark, "I hope you never become like him." Other nights, when the world felt especially heavy, I would whisper, "I hope you do." I hated myself for both thoughts. My life became small on purpose. Predictable. Safe. I worked a job that paid just enough. I lived in an apartment that felt temporary but secure. I avoided attention. I avoided questions. I avoided men who asked too much about my past. When people asked about his father, I learned to smile gently and say, "It's just us." And it was. For a long time. I told myself he had moved on. Men like him always do. Men who control rooms, narratives, and outcomes don't sit around mourning women who vanish without explanation. They replace. They adjust. They forget. I told myself forgetting was easy for people who control everything. That loving me had been a chapter he closed the moment I disappeared. There were moments, dangerous moments, when I almost believed it. Then there were the other moments. The ones that ambushed me without warning. A voice that sounded like his in a crowd. A scent that reminded me of his coat. A certain way someone said my name. Those moments stole my breath. They reminded me that love doesn't need permission to linger. "Mom," my son would say, tugging my sleeve. "You're not listening." I would blink, smile, kneel in front of him. "I'm sorry." "What were you saying?" He would grin, forgiving me instantly, and keep talking about dinosaurs or school or whatever small crisis mattered most to him that day. And just like that, the past would retreat again. Not gone. Just quieter. Years passed like that. Slowly. Safely. Until one afternoon. It was an ordinary day. That's how these things always begin. The most life-altering moments rarely announce themselves. The sun was warm but not harsh. The sky that soft, indifferent blue that makes everything feel deceptively calm. My son's hand was in mine as we walked down the street, his steps half skipping, half dragging. "Can we get something sweet?" he asked, looking up at me with hopeful eyes. "Just one thing," I said. "Dinner's soon." He grinned like he'd already won. The cafe was small. Cozy. The kind of place people lingered without realizing how much time had passed. A bell chimed softly as we pushed the door open, the sound cutting through the low murmur of voices and the gentle hum of an espresso machine. The smell of warm bread and coffee wrapped around us instantly, comforting and familiar. I took one step inside. And my heart stopped. He was sitting by the window. For a split second, my mind refused to accept it. I thought grief had finally turned cruel, that my imagination had decided to punish me with a hallucination shaped exactly like the man I had spent 10 years trying not to remember. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. My grip tightened on my son's hand. My breath hitched painfully in my chest. He looked older. Not weaker. Sharper. The softness I remembered was gone, replaced by something colder, heavier. His face was leaner. His jaw more defined. The lines around his eyes deeper, earned, like the weight of the world had settled there and stayed. Power clung to him now, not loudly, but with quiet certainty. Worn like a second skin. He was dressed simply. No unnecessary details. Everything about him still felt intentional. For a moment, he was distracted, focused on something on the table in front of him. A phone. Papers. I couldn't tell. He lifted his head casually. And then his eyes landed on my son. And stayed there. The world narrowed to that single moment. The bell stopped echoing. The cafe noise faded into a dull blur. My heart began to pound so hard I was sure someone else could hear it. I felt like I had stepped into the past without warning, like time had folded in on itself and trapped me. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He didn't look confused. He just stared. I knew that look. I had seen it before, years ago, when he was processing information that mattered. When he was calculating, assessing, absorbing. His gaze flicked briefly to me, then back to my son, as if confirming something he already suspected. I felt exposed. Seen in a way I hadn't been in 10 years. "Mom," my son whispered, tugging my hand. "Why did you stop?" My voice failed me. I swallowed hard. "Sorry. I was just thinking." I wanted to turn around. To leave. To pretend this wasn't happening. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to protect, to disappear the way I always had. But my legs didn't move. Fear pinned me to the floor. I forced myself to walk to the counter, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could feel his presence behind me, like gravity. I ordered with a voice that sounded distant and wrong, my heart racing as if I were standing on the edge of something irreversible. My son leaned against the counter, swinging his feet. "Can I get the chocolate one?" he asked the barista. "Please," I added automatically. While we waited, I felt it. That unmistakable pressure. His gaze. It burned between my shoulder blades. I didn't turn around. I didn't trust myself to look at him again and still remain standing. Why now? Why here? Why him, of all people? When our order was ready, I took it with shaking hands. I told myself not to look. I told myself to walk straight to the door. I told myself I had survived worse. I turned. Our eyes met. 10 years collapsed into a single breath. There it was. Recognition. Certainty. Something else underneath that made my chest ache. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply nodded once. Polite. Controlled. Like we were strangers who shared nothing but a passing glance. It was worse than anger would have been. "Mom," my son whispered again, unaware of the earthquake happening inside me. "Who is that man?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "No one," I finally said, the lie tasting bitter. "Just someone I used to know." We left. The bell chimed again behind us, too cheerful for the moment it marked. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too normal. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the bag. I didn't stop walking until we were half a block away. Only then did I realize something that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. He hadn't looked surprised. He hadn't looked confused. He had looked like a man who had just found what he was looking for. I felt it before I understood it. That slow, terrifying recognition that crept up my spine and wrapped itself around my ribs. It wasn't logical. It wasn't loud. It was instinct. The kind that tells you something irreversible has just happened, even before your mind catches up. My fingers tightened around my son's hand without meaning to. Not painfully. Protectively. Like if I held on hard enough, nothing could touch him. My chest forgot how to breathe. I watched him from the corner of my eye, afraid that if I looked directly, the moment would shatter into something worse. He didn't smile. He didn't stand. He didn't say my name. He just watched. Completely still. Like a man seeing a ghost in a mirror at the same time. Like a man staring at proof. There was no anger on his face. No shock. Just focus. Calculation. And something deeper that made my stomach twist. I should have turned around. I should have walked out the second I realized who was sitting by that window. I should have listened to every survival instinct I'd sharpened over 10 long years. Instead, I stayed. I told myself it was because leaving abruptly would draw attention. I told myself it was because my son was already excited, already safe in his small happiness. The truth was uglier. I wasn't ready to run again. I ordered a drink with a voice that didn't feel like mine. The words came out steady, but my hands trembled as I reached for my wallet. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I sat at a small table near the wall, my back half turned to him, my body angled just enough to pretend I wasn't aware of every inch of space he occupied. The chair felt too hard. The air felt too warm. Every sound seemed sharper than it should have been. Cups clinked. Someone laughed. A spoon scraped against porcelain. Life continued with cruel indifference. "Mom," my son whispered, tugging my sleeve. I flinched slightly, leaning closer to him. "What is it?" "That man keeps looking at me." My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. "I know," I said too quickly, my voice low. Too controlled. "Finish your cookie." He frowned, glancing over his shoulder again. "Do I know him?" "No," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "You don't." He shrugged, easily satisfied, and went back to his treat. Children trust the answers they're given. Adults live with the consequences of lies. Every second stretched unbearably long. Time slowed, thick and suffocating. I could feel his gaze like heat against my skin. I pretended to focus on my cup, watching the steam rise, watching my reflection ripple in the surface of the coffee. I looked older than I remembered. Tired. Stronger in some ways. Broken in others. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A woman who vanished. A question unanswered. A wound reopened. Every stolen glance burned. I caught flashes of him in the reflection of the window. The way he leaned back slightly, arms relaxed, posture controlled. The way his attention never fully left us, even when he pretended to glance at his phone. I knew that posture. I had seen it in rooms where decisions were made quietly and consequences followed loudly. My thoughts raced in circles. How long had he been here? Was this coincidence or design? Did he know? Did he suspect? Had I just walked my son straight into danger? Why was I like this? Why had I ever believed I could leave that life behind completely? "Mom," my son said again, softer this time. "You're squeezing my hand." I loosened my grip immediately. "Sorry, sweetheart." He studied my face with the unsettling perception children sometimes have. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I am just tired. The lie settled between us. I took a sip of my drink and nearly choked. My throat was too tight. I set the cup down, my hands unsteady, and forced myself to breathe slowly. In. Out. I counted silently, the way I had taught myself during sleepless nights and quiet panic attacks. I tried not to think about the past. About the last time I had seen him. About how I had left without a word. About the look he might have worn when he realized I was gone. I had imagined it 1,000 times. Anger. Confusion. Indifference. I had never imagined this calm, watchful silence. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the familiarity. Something in me responded to his presence the way it always had. My body remembered him even when my mind screamed caution. I hated myself for it. Hated that after everything, after all the years of building walls and choosing safety, he could still reduce me to this tight, fragile state with nothing more than his attention. I told myself again that we were strangers now. That 10 years changed people. That whatever we had belonged to another life. Then my son laughed. It was small and sudden, triggered by something the barista said. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. I saw it then, the way his head snapped up, the way his eyes softened for just a fraction of a second before hardening again. He looked at my son like someone staring at an answer they hadn't wanted to ask. My stomach dropped. I gathered our things quickly, my movements abrupt enough to draw my son's attention. Already? He asked, disappointed. But I'm not done. We need to go, I said gently but firmly. We'll come back another time. He pouted but slid off the chair obediently. I stood, my legs shaky beneath me, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack open. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he might stand too. That he might block our path. That he might finally say my name out loud. He didn't. As I turned toward the door, I felt it again. That pull. That awareness. Like two magnets dragged too close together. I couldn't stop myself. I looked at him. Our eyes met. It was like falling. 10 years collapsed into a single breath. All the unsaid words. All the nights I had imagined this moment and begged the universe never to make it real. His gaze flicked from my face to my son standing beside me, then back again. There it was. Confirmation. Something dark and unreadable passed through his expression. My heart did something reckless. Something stupid. Something hopeful. He nodded. Just once. Polite. Controlled. Distant. Like we were strangers who shared nothing but a brief, unremarkable moment in a small cafe. It hurt more than anger ever could have. I nodded back before I could stop myself. A reflex. A remnant of the woman I used to be. Then I turned away quickly, guiding my son toward the door, my breath shallow, my hands cold. The bell chimed as we stepped outside, bright and cheerful, mocking the storm raging inside me. The sunlight felt too harsh. The street too loud. I didn't stop walking until we were several steps away, my heart still racing, my thoughts tangled and frantic. Only then did the realization hit me fully. He hadn't looked surprised. He hadn't looked confused. He had looked like a man who had just found proof of something he had already suspected, and a reason not to look away again. That night, I cried in the shower until the water ran cold. I stood there long after the steam thinned and the tiles turned icy beneath my feet, my forehead pressed against the wall, my hands covering my mouth to keep the sound in. I cried for the woman I had been, for the life I had abandoned, for the man I still loved despite everything I knew. I cried because one look, one silent nod, had undone 10 years of careful healing like it had never existed at all. I hated myself for it. I hated that my heart still reacted to him like a reflex. That my chest ached with something dangerously close to longing. That his silence had felt louder than any confrontation ever could. Why was I like this? Why him, of all people? Why couldn't love obey logic, or fear, or time? When I finally turned the water off, my skin was numb and my eyes burned. I wrapped myself in a towel and sat on the edge of the tub, listening to the apartment settle into silence. My son was asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the fault line that had cracked open beneath our lives that afternoon. I watched him later, standing in his doorway, the soft glow of the nightlight illuminating his face. He looked peaceful. Safe. I told myself that was all that mattered. That whatever storm was brewing in my chest, I could contain it. I always had. The fear came later. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It crept in slowly, disguising itself as coincidence. As imagination. As a mother's overactive instincts. It started with a car parked across the street. The first time I noticed it, I dismissed it immediately. People parked there all the time. The second time, I told myself it was nothing. The third time, on the fourth consecutive evening, my stomach tightened just a little too much to ignore. Then there was the park. My son was climbing the small jungle gym, laughing as he tried to reach the highest bar. I was sitting on a bench nearby, pretending to read while watching him out of the corner of my eye like I always did. A man sat beside me, friendly smile, unassuming face. "How old is he?" he asked casually. 6, I replied without thinking. "He's got sharp eyes," the man said, nodding toward my son. "Takes after his father?" The question landed wrong. Too familiar. Too easy. I forced a laugh. "I wouldn't know." The man smiled again, stood, and walked away. I watched him until he disappeared, my chest tight, my pulse suddenly too loud. That night, I checked the locks twice before bed. Then came the email. An old number. One I hadn't seen in years. No subject. No message. Just a blank space staring back at me like an unfinished sentence. I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. I didn't reply. I deleted it. Still, my hands shook long after. I told myself I was being paranoid. Single mothers learn to doubt themselves. To downplay fear. To tell themselves they're overreacting because there's no one else to share the burden with. I told myself that if something were wrong, I would feel it clearly. That fear wouldn't arrive in whispers. I was wrong about that too. The driver appeared around the same time. At first, he was just another face. Another name on an app. Another quiet ride home after late shifts when my body felt heavy and my patience thin. He was polite. Soft-spoken. He asked how my day was without sounding like he expected an answer. "You working late again?" he asked one evening, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Seems like it," I replied, tired. "That's rough," he said gently. "Make sure you're getting rest." There was no edge to his concern. No curiosity that felt invasive. Just kindness. Real or well-practiced, I couldn't tell. And somehow, that made me relax. Over time, I noticed something strange. Whenever I requested a ride in the evenings, it was him. Always him. Same car. Same calm presence. Same soft music playing low in the background. He never pried. Never crossed a line. He remembered small details without making a show of it. "How's your son?" he asked one night. "Still obsessed with dinosaurs?" I blinked. "Yeah." "How did you?" "You mentioned it once," he said with a small smile. Stuck with me. I started requesting his rides without consciously deciding to. It felt safer. Familiar. Predictable. Something about his presence quieted the low hum of anxiety that had settled into my bones since the cafe. Sometimes, on the drive home, I would watch the city lights streak past the window and let myself breathe. Let myself exist in the silence without bracing for impact. I hated how much I needed that. One night, rain tapped softly against the windshield as we drove through dimly lit streets. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, older, wary, carrying too much history in her eyes. I was thinking about the man in the cafe again. About the way his gaze had lingered. About the way fear and longing had tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. "You've been quiet," the driver said. "Just tired," I replied automatically. He nodded, understanding. "You've had a lot on your mind lately." I looked up sharply. "What makes you say that?" He met my eyes briefly in the mirror. His expression was calm. Reassuring. "People carry it differently," he said. "Some wear it on their faces. Some carry it in their shoulders." I laughed softly despite myself. "You sound like a therapist." "Just observant," he replied. We drove in silence for a few more minutes. The rain grew heavier. The street lights blurred. I felt strangely suspended between past and present, between fear and something that almost felt like relief. Then he spoke again. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said gently. My breath caught. "Afraid of what?" He hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then, through the rearview mirror, he met my eyes. "He won't let anything happen to you." My blood turned to ice. The city seemed to tilt. The sound of rain grew distant. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might be sick. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He looked back at the road. He didn't answer. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. My thoughts raced, colliding into one another with dizzying speed. He won't let anything happen." The words echoed over and over, heavy with implication. When we reached my building, I didn't move right away. My hand rested on the door handle, my fingers numb. "Good night," the driver said calmly, like nothing had happened. I forced myself to nod and step out into the rain, my legs unsteady beneath me. I didn't look back as the car pulled away, but I felt it, the certainty that I was no longer invisible. That the small, safe life I had built had been noticed. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling too fast. My son slept peacefully down the hall. I pressed my forehead to the cool wood and closed my eyes. The fear I had been avoiding finally settled in fully. Not sharp. Not explosive. Focused. Because deep down, beneath the panic and the denial, I understood something terrifying and undeniable. He had found me. And this time, he wasn't looking away. The truth arrived quietly. Not in an explosion. Not in a confrontation. It came the way everything dangerous in his world always did, measured, deliberate, devastating in its calm. I didn't learn it all at once. It came in fragments that didn't make sense until they did. A comment overheard. A look held too long. The way certain fears dissolved while others sharpened. The way the driver stopped coming after that night. The way the parked car across the street disappeared and never returned. The way questions at the park suddenly stopped. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt exposed. It started with a message. Not from an unknown number this time. From him. No greeting. No explanation. "We need to talk." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, my heart pounding hard enough to make me lightheaded. 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. About what? About the past? About the cafe? About my son? I didn't reply right away. I couldn't. I paced my living room, every step tight with dread, glancing down the hallway to make sure my son was still asleep, still untouched by whatever storm was about to break over us. Another message came through minutes later. I know this is frightening. I won't come unless you say yes. That was the moment something shifted. Because he hadn't demanded. He hadn't cornered me. He hadn't leveraged power or fear. He had asked. I sat down hard on the couch, my chest aching. Why now? Why this restraint after all these years? Why kindness when anger would have made more sense? How long? I typed before I could stop myself. The reply came almost instantly. Long enough. My breath caught. How long? I repeated, my fingers trembling. Weeks, he answered. Not years. I didn't know then. I closed my eyes, pressing my palm to my forehead as the truth began to take shape in my mind, sharp and unmistakable. He had known about our son for weeks. The cafe wasn't an accident. The timing. The location. The way he had been waiting by the window like a man bracing for impact. The way his eyes had gone straight to my child without hesitation. None of it had been coincidence. He hadn't stumbled into us by fate. He had found us carefully, quietly, the only way he knew how. And still, he hadn't confronted me. That part hurt almost as much as it scared me. You can come, I finally typed. But not tonight. Tomorrow, he replied. I'll wait. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, a mug of cold tea untouched in front of me, replaying everything over and over. The fear I'd lived with for 10 years tangled with something else now. Something heavier. Something dangerously close to regret. When morning came, I moved through the day like I was underwater. I took my son to school. I smiled at the teacher. I nodded at other parents. I answered emails at work. I laughed at the right moments. All the while, my heart counted down the hours. By evening, the sky had turned the color of bruises. Rain started just after sunset, tapping against the windows softly at first, then harder, more insistent. I kept checking the door, my nerves stretched thin. When the knock finally came, it was gentle. Controlled. Nothing like the pounding of a man angry or desperate. I opened the door. He stood there, rain streaking down his coat, his hair damp, his shoulders tense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light cast sharp shadows across his face, making him look older, more worn, and unbearably familiar. When he said my name, his voice broke. You should have told me. The words weren't sharp. They weren't accusing. They were quiet. Almost pleading. I swallowed hard, every practiced defense crumbling at once. I was scared, I whispered. Of you. Of myself. Of what loving you meant. His jaw tightened. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the sound final and soft at the same time. The rain faded into the background, replaced by the sound of our breathing. I would have burned my world down for you, he said softly. I still would. The confession landed heavy between us. I felt it in my chest, in my throat, in every part of me that had once believed love was simple. I wanted to tell him he was too late. That the damage was already done. That I had learned how to survive without him. Instead, tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. I didn't want that, I said. I didn't want you to destroy yourself for me. I know, he replied. That's why you left. I looked at him sharply. You think you understand? I understand enough, he said. Enough to know why you ran. Enough to know you were right to be afraid. The admission stunned me. He stepped closer, slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. The world you ran from didn't stop moving when you left, he continued. It shifted. Changed hands. New people. Hungrier people. My stomach clenched. And now? And now, he said, they're looking at you. The room felt suddenly smaller. At me? I echoed. Why? He hesitated. That tiny pause told me everything. Because you're connected to me. Because you disappeared. Because you have something they think I care about. My heart stuttered painfully. You mean my son? Our son, he corrected quietly. The word settled into the room like a truth that had always been there, waiting to be spoken. I backed away instinctively. That's why you're here, I said. Not for me. For him. For both of you, he said immediately. I didn't come back to punish you. I came back to protect you. I let out a broken laugh. By sending drivers? By watching from a distance? I didn't want to scare you, he said. I wanted you to feel safe before you knew why. I shook my head, overwhelmed. You don't get to decide that for me. I know, he said. That's why I waited. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything we hadn't said. My heart ached in ways I didn't have words for. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to cling to anger like armor. It would have been easier than admitting how much relief I felt knowing someone like him stood between us and whatever danger lurked in the shadows. Instead, my legs gave out beneath me. I sank onto the couch, pressing my hands to my face, my shoulders shaking. He crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt in front of me without hesitation. Without pride. Without control. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For the woman you saw erased. For the fear I taught you. For every reason you believed you had to leave. I looked at him through tears. You can't undo that. I know, he said. But I can do better now. Something inside me cracked open then. I leaned forward before I could stop myself, pressing my forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around me carefully, like I might shatter. The warmth of him felt achingly familiar. Dangerous. Healing. I breathed him in and hated how right it felt. Loving him had once meant losing myself. Becoming smaller. Quieter. Afraid. Now, loving him felt like a choice. A conscious, terrifying one. To stand instead of disappear. To speak instead of vanish. To protect without erasing myself. I won't run again, I said softly. But I won't be silent either. He nodded against my hair. I wouldn't ask you to be. Later, much later, when my son came out of his room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, confused by the voices, everything changed again. He froze when he saw him. So did I. My son stared at the man standing in our living room, his small face serious, curious. Something passed between them instantly. Recognition without understanding. Who are you? My son asked. He knelt again, bringing himself to eye level, his voice gentle in a way I had never heard before. I'm someone who should have been here sooner. My son frowned, studying him. You look like me. The words hit us both like a blow. He inhaled sharply. I saw it then, the tremor in his hands as he reached out, then stopped, unsure if he was allowed. May I? He asked me quietly. I hesitated only a second. Then I nodded. When he held our son for the first time, his hands trembled. Not with fear. With awe. He cradled him like something sacred, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes shining in a way that shattered every image I had ever held of him as untouchable. Powerful. Untethered. In that moment, he was just a man undone by love and loss and a second chance he hadn't known he would get. My son wrapped his arms around his neck without hesitation, trusting in a way only children can. And for the first time in my life, I understood something I had never seen clearly before. Real power isn't the ability to destroy lives quietly. It's the courage to protect one loudly, even when it costs you everything.